good afternoon, and it gives me enormous pleasure to be here today to explain the program that we're running in Cambodia in Banteay, Chhmar. I need to call Dr. Pheakdey to come down because he's going to participate. Can you come down here, Paddy? Need to... So our talk is actually going to be split into two activities. I'm going to explain the basic conservation program that we've been running in Banteay Chhmar for the last 4 years. And then in the middle, I'm going to invite Paddy to explain the 3D digital scanning program, which he's been in charge of for really the last couple of years. This is new. Do I press something else and make it work? Maybe not. Anyway, Banteay Chhmar. I'm far more familiar with this program than with the last one. Banteay Chhmar is, as I say, has been a project we've been working on now for the last 4 years. And the main focus of this project actually is on the training of a local group, and that's really the topic I've been asked to talk about, to show how, in fact, the whole training program got going and what we've been able to achieve. I started my life in Cambodia many, many years ago. In fact, I worked in Angkor for about 12 years with the World Monuments Fund, and it would be unfair not to actually introduce you, first of all, to Angkor, and then to explain a little bit about what we were doing there. For those that don't know Cambodia that well, the site that we're working on is Banteay Chhmar, which is focused here. Angkor is about 160 odd kilometers as the road runs, and about 100 kilometers as the crow flies. And it's located in Siem Reap, very close to the great lake, the Tonle Sap. And the capital is Phnom Penh, which is way down towards the south. My life started in Cambodia in about 1989 when I was asked by the Getty and then the World Monuments Fund to actually go and visit Cambodia to see whether there was anything going on. And it was one of the most extraordinary experiences of my life, because Cambodia at that time was a completely dead country. It was striving after all the problems, the political issues, the war, and I remember my first task there was to go and talk to, first of all, the university, the Department of Architecture, and I was shown into a room that was absolutely seething, full of young people. They had nowhere to sit, they had no desks, there was no electricity, and I had to tell them about architecture. And I remember it was called Promotion Angkor, and to me, my French not being all that good meant, oh, well, we're here to promote Angkor, but I very quickly learned that it actually meant to, to actually educate and train people about Angkor. It was an extraordinary experience. And then from there we went up to Angkor itself, and I started looking around, not really knowing what we were doing there, because we were the only foreigners. There were about 6 of us, and we had an army, literally an army of guards and policemen, etc., surrounding us. And I was told that by the then World Monuments Fund that it would be very nice to set up a project. Well, first thing we did was to walk into Prae Khan, and this is how I remember it. completely overgrown. There was one rather windy path leading into it. And actually, I fell in love with the place immediately. And I spent 12 years really there, starting up what became a very, very successful training program. And that was after about 10 years of work. You can see the extraordinary difference that was really mainly as a result of clearance and very careful minor conservation activities. In each of these activities, we were training the local workforce. When I first started, I was told, you'll be very lucky to find a single craftsman that still lives. And I was very lucky because I did find 3 people who had survived the Khmer Rouge, and they were our main leaders, and it was from them that we were able to begin this program. Before and after, again, a lot of it has to do with photography, I know, but it was an extraordinary experience. The first time I went to try and find this end, that the grass was up to here and it was totally covered in shrubbery. And as I got to know the site in those, it was just a week. I remember climbing up onto a tower, and this was the view that I strongly remember, because I realized that I had quite an enormous task on my hands, and that this was going to be the training ground. We set up a series of goals and objectives, which I'm happy to say still stand very strongly in the Global Heritage Program of Conservation by Design. We set ourselves some fairly high challenges to do it there, but I'm very happy to say that most of it came through quite successfully. And these are just a few examples of sort of projects that we undertook. Everything was very much based on whether we could be there for another year or another month or another week. And so every time we started a project, I had to bear this in mind. And this project actually took us about, I think it was 2 months, and we were able to do it from start to finish before anything drastic happened. This wonderful building, the Dharamsala of Prakan, took a great deal longer, and it was very much into our program that we started it. And I was there really teaching conservation, the concept, the philosophy, as well as the practicalities of it. And there were major problems, structural problems, and we ended up by having to take down the first section of it. And it was really the first time that anastylosis in the, as it were, the second phase of activity in Angkor took place. But the result was fairly remarkable. And you'll notice here, the section of roof is exactly as it was in the last picture, because it was structurally sound. And one of the things that we didn't want to do was to destroy the historical patina of the site. The second project that we undertook was a very important one, because Ta Som, which was a little temple at the other end of a great barai in Angkor, and Ta Som was a project that I decided I wanted to get my Khmer staff to look after entirely on their own. I was there just looking over their shoulder. And you can see one of the first projects we did was the entrance, the Gopura gateway, which had been completely taken over by a tree. And on the right-hand side was the outcome of our work. One of the extraordinary things was that most of the Ta Som had been pulled down during the 13th century iconoclasm, because Hinduism returned, and they pulled down everything that was Buddhist. And so when we started doing a lot of exploration, we discovered all these wonderful bits of sculpture. And again, rather than beginning to attempt to completely rebuild a structure, what we did was we established a whole series of smaller projects. And this fronton here actually was was originally here. And we turned the site really very much into a sort of stone museum, and which is now one of the more popular sites in Angkor. These are the two people, Vamorin, who is in fact now the rector of the University of Fine Arts in Phnom Penh, and behind him Sinat, who is working on the other major remote site of Preah Vihear. They were both trained and trainers and trainees on this particular site. We can't go very much further without actually mentioning Angkor Wat, and I can do that with some justification, because Angkor Wat has a feature in it that is very similar to what we have in Banteay Chhmar, and that is its famous bas-relief. We won't go into any of the size or scale of this extraordinary monument, other than to show you some of the exquisite, an exquisite example of the bas-relief. And you'll bear this in mind, because I will be coming to the bas-relief in Banteay Chhmar a little bit later on. The other temple, which is maybe second to Angkor Wat, is that of the Bayon. And the Banteay Chhmar project has a very close association. These two sites are perhaps some of the greatest archaeological and architectural sites, certainly in the whole of Asia, if not in the world. The Bayon in particular has, all these towers have a whole series of faces around them. The face towers of Bayon. And the Bayon also has a remarkable collection of bas-relief. And these bas-relief tell the story of life at that time, the end of the 12th century. In Angkor Wat, they're mostly stories relating to the great Indian epics, whereas here they tell a very interesting story, mostly of battles, because Khmers have always been having, they're always fighting. But nonetheless, you can tell a lot of what life was like. You can see here the oxen, the elephants, and there are some wonderful, wonderful scenes which very much relate to present-day life there. So with that, we journey north to Banteay Chhmar. With Banteay Chhmar, which literally means the citadel of cats, for those that like feline animals, or we are told also, and it's exactly the same spelling, it means the citadel that's long and narrow, which doesn't neither really apply to Banteay Chhmar. But this is, I think, probably what we were going to look at earlier on, the Google view of Banteay Chhmar. And this was taken by one of my students and made a little more realistic. And it does show the full extent of the site. Banteay Chhmar is the main temple is surrounded by a wall, and then there would have been an area where the community would have lived, and that was surrounded by a great moat. The added attraction here is this enormous reservoir, or barai, which is approximately 1,400 meters long, in the middle of which there is a mebon, a little temple shrine, and this, the whole of the water supply comes from the northeast corner. And it's been one of the great studies that we've been able to do, the whole hydrology of this particular site. Moving on quickly, these are the first glimpses that I remember of Banteay Chhmar. An extraordinary experience. And when you see this pile of rubble, you do begin to wonder where on earth you're going to start. The trees are just taken over and are literally strangling the building, pulling it apart. We had to make up our mind where to start. And as I mentioned already, that there are some very fine bas-reliefs in Banteay Chhmar, And so it was decided that we would begin work there. And this was my first memory in 1997, when I went to Banteay, Chhmar. And we then had to wonder how to begin. Well, obviously the most important thing is when you're training a bunch of local people, most of whom were illiterate, none of whom had really had any training in either craftsmanship or in drafting, we had to start from the very beginning. And I was very fortunate in that I was able to bring up a team from Angkor who I could trust, and I knew their skills. And they turned from being trainees to being trainers. And as a result, we've been able to train up a group now of well over 50 people in the process of not only recording and exposing the site, but also in the whole question of how we put it all back together again. The person on the right, on the left, you can see he sets out a grid, and it's a meter square grid. Every single stone is drawn as found in that grid. Then it's removed, and then they take it down to the next level until we reach ground level. Every stone is given a reference number, and it's eventually taken off to what we call the stone graveyard. The guy on the right is actually working more on the bas-relief itself, and before we can move any stone, before we can start the process of repairing, conserving, it has to be measured, referenced, because it's going to be removed. These guys were probably sign writers when we took them on. And this is just a selection of the drawings that they were doing. And you can see the detail. It's all done on squared paper, and then it's transferred onto an AutoCAD, a software program, a digital program. And these drawings, you can blow them up to well over the size of what they are here, and every one has its reference number on it. So we don't in any way remove any of the background information on where these stones fall or where they, because we found more often than not that the stones fall in a pattern, and this is something Paddy will be talking about later on. The other project we had, the other main activity we had to do was to make sure the leveling, everything was completely out of level, all the walls were twisted, and this becomes incredibly complicated when, as you can see here, there is no mortar between the stones. It's all dry laid, and some of the really very fine, tight joints. Any movement causes strife. Once we had completed the process of measurement, this is the second stage beyond the graveyard, as it were, and all these stones were stacked opposite to the place where they would have originally come from. And this started to give us an idea of what the shape and scope of work was. A typical drawing showing the lower section, you can see the deformation, and then the upper section with the new stonework and the laterite work that we had to put in to make it straight. If you can imagine the structure above, the vaults, if you're just 1 or 2 centimeters out at the lower level, by the time it gets to the top, there are huge, great gaps. And so it's a very, very precise process that we had to go through. In the early days, all the stones were moved by hand. And we managed often, with great pride, to have moved 10 stones in a day. Now, this wasn't a waste of time, because going through this process, our team, they were all divided up into teams of between 7 and 10 people, each having its own sous chef who was in charge of that group. And they would learn the process of moving stone. Every time you move a stone, there's a likelihood of a chip or a damage to the corners or edges. And this is paramount, something that you have to avoid, particularly when you're working on bas-relief. We were very fortunate that one of our former donors, in fact, from Angkor days came, and I made a few hints, I have to admit. Halfway through his stay, he said, "John, I think it would be a good idea if we got you a crane." And I said, "Well, thank you very, very much." We're now able to move 60 stones a day, which is remarkable. Here you can see the process of leveling and re-establishing the bas-relief, which runs along this line. We had to take, having cleared it all, there were certain sections that we had to take down because we realized that that 1 or 2 centimeter mistake would cause complete havoc when we were reconstructing. And now they are just in the process of finalizing the first section, the first leveling section, as it were. Here you can see this was a photograph I took maybe a week ago, and the process is now finished here, and I think they probably got as far as this, and we have to get to the end, as you can see in the distance, by the end of this year to be on time. Very precise and detailed work. You can see the string line here. When we first started measuring it, the actual line of that was way out here. The whole thing had shifted as a result of having basically no foundations. Training, as I said, was really the major focus. And the character you see there is Mr. Lo, who's become the chef de chantier. And this guy worked with us in Ta Som, one of the small temple project I showed you before, was basically illiterate. He is now running the whole site. His knowledge and understanding of stones is something second to none. And we actually gave him a computer a couple of months ago because he is wanting to learn to use AutoCAD so that he can go from drawing the stone, taking it right the way through. And he's a wonderful example of the success in our training program. And Paddy, again, will have plenty to talk about him. I always compare the two, the 3D digital scanning and Mr. Lo. Mr. Lo actually is the hare, and Paddy at the moment is the tortoise. But I hope he'll be able to prove that it's not going to be much longer. This is a great message. It was one that was told, or one I discovered with the late Sir Bernard Fielden, who was one of my teachers, one of my gurus. And we spent hours discussing the whole system of training, how one went about it. And, you know, after several beers, we really hadn't come to a satisfactory conclusion until one day he suddenly said to me, "I've got it, John. You need a shadow." And I scratched my head. But, you know, I was brought up on Peter Pan, as I'm sure a lot of you know, the story of Peter Pan and the need for his shadow. And when he lost his shadow, that was a very dangerous period in his life. Well, Bernard was absolutely spot on, because I discovered that really the people that I had around me, my students, my staff, they used to follow me around. They were my shadow. And they were there watching, not necessarily listening, but watching what was going on. And it was amazing when I got to Cambodia to find that one of the great local traditions is still very much in evidence, which is shadow puppetry. And here you have an example of the shadow puppetry where they're teaching people their religion, they're often describing the great epics. They have shadow puppetry to teach the locals about family planning. Why can't we set up a system of actually training people in conservation? It's conserving a tradition also, which is so important. So this was really just to demonstrate how important our program for training is. And there are a few numbers there. We have 7 professional staff, 50 craftsmen, and a very excellent administration to look after our household, because we're out in the sticks, and when we go there, we live and we're fed by, in fact, the cook who found me in 1989, and she's been with us ever since. So we have a wonderful, as some of you will remember, a wonderful kitchen and a very nice place to live up there. The second very successful training program, educational program, has really been teaching this bunch, who are all people from Banteay Chhmar, who'd never really been out of their village. We took them down to Siem Reap, where they went through a very rigorous training on the history and of their country, and also a description of the great architectural monuments in very formal class. Many of them, as I say, had never been out of their own village, and it was extremely successful. It was taught all in Khmer. The guys that were teaching them had been trained by one of the German teams up there at Angkor Wat, and they had become fully conversant in the process of stone conservation. And this team had the great idea of setting up their own chantier or studio, and we were their first clients, as it were, and it's been extremely successful. They taught in the formal setting in Siem Reap, and then they held a whole series of workshops on site, undertaken by Simon Warwick, who's a Britisher working out of Ikrom. And they're now the people that we're relying on entirely for the repair and conservation of the stones. This is a whole series of pictures showing work on the bas-relief itself. The next group was a group that we trained up in actual stone work, in dressing stones and what have you. And they are now very proficient and actually having to prepare most of the stone. Archaeology, we have a great group of archaeologists working with us. Although our work is not in any way archaeological as such, we have to do investigation below ground, mainly to find out what's there. And in this case, this was underneath the bas-relief wall. The bas-relief wall is here. There was one slab of stone, a piece of very crumbly laterite, and then a hole. And I must say, my engineer, Professor Predrag Gavrilovic, blanched visibly when he saw this, because we then had to really put our thinking caps on to develop a system to actually provide a support foundation for all of this. Preservation by design, you're going to hear a lot more about that in some of the later presentations, but we obviously were challenged. We were one of the first of the sites really to try and follow this concept, and it's now working very well indeed. Another very important thing is communication amongst the staff. I love this. I didn't realize until I put the slide up that it said "Good morning, Cambodia." But this was a site meeting amongst the main leaders of each of the groups, led by the guy with his hands in the air, Sarun, who is my assistant. Structural analysis. Yes, you wonder why it hasn't fallen down. Well, it's quite extraordinary. There are several examples of this. But one of the problems when you get a structural engineer on site, I mean, they think of safety and security, and they have to have to be very, very assured that the site, the work that they put into it is not going to collapse. And often they very much overload the security aspect. I was fortunate in knowing a wonderful professor, Predrag Gavrilovic, who comes on site. He's in his sort of mid-70s now, but he's as agile as the gang around him. And they carry out very intensive discussions on the actual process of repairing and conserving, as well as the whole issue of site management. This is one particular job, and then I'm going to be able to hand over to Paddy finally. The face towers are the unique face towers of Banteay Chhmar, and this is one of the projects that we're working on the right-hand side. It was a picture I found in 1937, and you can see there's been very little damage to the site, to the structure, until you turn around on the other side. And on the left, we have the beginning of a failure. On the right was a point of collapse when we decided it was essential to take it down and prevent any further damage. So these are the processes of dismantling it, re-establishing a sound foundation. While we were doing this, we found this extraordinary pinnacle. It's a bronze pinnacle, gilded, dating from probably the late 12th century, and it's the only example that's ever been found so far in Cambodia. So I'm going to just explain the two types of scanning that we have. This is what's known as the Breukman scanner, which is 100,000 euros worth of equipment, which Paddy is operating, and we decided that this was rather out of our league. But nonetheless, they did a great job setting it up. We established a system whereby each stone was brought in. It had to be photographed and moved about between 8 and 16 times. And so we set up this turntable. And having done this for a period of about 2 months under the guidance of Anya, who is actually doing her PhD on this, we gave them the task of actually working on the section of bas-relief. And these are examples of the scanning, the results, going from on the top on the left. Here, the initial drawings done by our team, to the establishment of the first pictures, and then here is when they're all put together again. But Paddy will explain this in much more detail. And that's just a wonderful patchwork showing the different types and shapes of these stones. And with that, I hand you over to Paddy.
Thank you. For a short while. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I had a pleasure to continue this project, which is a contribution in terms of solution, innovative solution, and a sustainable preservation using 3D scanning techniques to do a 3D puzzle of this large stone blocks in Banteay Chhmar temple complex. Here is a picture about an overview how complex this project is. John has mentioned some of this work with about recording and do the survey of the existing fallen structure before we move every stone. And I want also to show that people is now, here is someone, here someone is walking around low. He also mentioned, John mentioned that he is, for me, a stone guy who is looking around and finding stones using information that I will show you what kind of information he used to find neighborhoods of stones. But this is a very, very time-consuming process, and we have to make this temporary restoration of stones to make sure that these stones are really belonging to a certain structure of a temple. So what we do is apply these rescanning techniques with a goal that this is for long-term application, because it's a methodological findings, research, take into account of computational science for cultural heritage. And again, our focus is to reduce or, in the best case, prevent the temporary restorations to avoid damage to the stones. And also, of course, a solid goal is develop a system that is specialized for 3D reassembling, virtual 3D reassembling of these stones. And of course, this documentation in 3D dimension, which is not available right now in Cambodia.
Speed it up,
okay. Okay. This is the hardware we are used, just very modest. It's a webcam and a laser line with a background and a software. Here is the object. Normally can be scanned with these tools, but for our purpose, is not possible, because we are dealing with a ton heavy of stone blocks, is of 2 meters large. So we have extended the background and improve the hardware that is useful for this purpose. Here is the process. We see that a block is placing in the background, and a camera is capturing with the laser. When the laser touches the blocks, then it is coming to the computer. And we made this 10 to 16 scans per block, so that we have the whole surface like shown here. And this is a result. After the scanning, we need to make this called alignment of the scans. 2 scans needs to have an overlapping area, so that we have a reference point or information of 2 scans, so they fit together. Here's the result. Remarkable is and also important for the puzzling, is these very thin lines between 2 surfaces, which is very important for us, and without the scanning would it not be possible. Why we do that? Because most of the people see that told me that probably it's not possible, because it's, when you look around, it's 30 to 500,000 blocks to scan and to put together. But I will tell you 6 factors that is possible, because it reduces. Factor 1 is the stones are falling not far from the structure. So when we do the puzzling, is not getting all the 500,000, but only a certain section, which is hundreds of blocks already. And the information that is can be captured from the characteristics of collapse is also relevant. Like here in this case, in this case is just a deformation of a foundation, so that we see that these blocks are not far from each other and that they belong to each other. Here is another factor that is related to geometric property 1. The sum of stones are having a kings inside on the surface, like here, Chhmar 2, and these. Okay, these are very useful information for us as well. Another thing is using human knows very well, low knows very fast that is this block belongs to the other because of the information on the carvings. But it's quite difficult for us to tell the computers to know these are the head and these are the body. But we have also developed or found out certain algorithmic methods to convert these ideas. And other things is the structure base, because stone of column and walls are different. So we distinguish them already when we put the stones into database before we let them to find out which are the neighborhoods.
Thanks, Patty. We really got to wrap up now.
Okay. And so this is what we have achieved now is 65% of the scanning.
No, thank you so much.
Okay.
Sorry, we got to keep moving on time. Patty, this is amazing stuff that he's doing. As you can see, like 300,000 to 500,000 blocks. So there's a lot of work to do, and we are working very hard to pass the project and train everyone to pass it to the Cambodian government so they can continue on probably for decades.